Hello, everyone. This is Saima from Holistic Happiness Academy. And today's video is about identifying narcissism and the top 10 traits of narcissism. Now, these 10 traits could be obvious to you in a person. That would mean that they're pretty much higher on the narcissistic scale. Uh, but sometimes a few of these traits are obvious. And sometimes, you kind of wonder about that person. So I just wanted to point out that narcissism is in everybody. We all have a self focus, and we can all take things personally, and there can be that a tendency to prioritize our self, and oftentimes labeled as selfishness. But there are healthier degrees of that quality, and there are dysfunctional or toxic degrees of that quality. So the top 10 characteristics that I'm going to be speaking about are the less healthy level of that issue narcissism, which is kind of global, because if we look around us, social media is quite narcissistic of what we have, and there seems to be this quality of this. And so we can say, compared to many other cultures that have lived before us, that in general our culture is more self-oriented, it's more individualistic, and therefore narcissistic. But that is a use of the term that I don't want to go into in this video. I'm going to just focus on human beings, and they could be from any culture in the world, but they could have some key characteristics that identify very clearly that they are higher on the scale of narcissism. Now, most of you watching this video are probably already familiar with narcissism. I'm just going to redefine it. Narcissism is basically an automatic response to the world that is selfish, meaning that advances the interests of the person, uh, that individual, rather than the interests of anybody else. So their first thought is about how it's going to affect me. Am I under threat? And so their first thing goes there. Whereas people lower on the narcissistic scale may actually be very much more kind and compassionate. So their first response could be, how does it affect the family? How does it affect my company? How does this affect the world at large? And so this is the difference between the mindsets, between narcissism and other personality types. And so let's look at these top 10 characteristics, which would help you identify if a person you're dealing with, dating, in a relationship, with family member, workplace, and how basically in other videos we'll be talking about communication styles that would be more effective, if especially if you're on the lower end of the spectrum of narcissism, or your culture, or you've been socialized to sort of be less selfish. So that those are factors also in our personalities. So the first key difference between a person who's higher on the narcissism scale is they feel like a victim always. So their responses to anything you say to them would, if you criticize them, they would feel that they are being victimized, that they are the victim of that. And it's funny how any feedback that you give them would be seen through that lens. You say to them that you came home late yesterday and you told me that you're going to be coming home at 6. Their response wouldn't be most likely that, hey, I'm so sorry, I forgot to call you. That's not going to be a natural narcissistic person's response. Their response is going to be pretty much, how dare you question me? I was having such a hard time. I had such a busy day at work, and they'll be offended almost as to why you even asked them to follow up on something that they had committed to do. They might actually rage at you for that. So that's a key difference between narcissists and other types, is that their first thought is, I'm the victim. Even when I make a mistake, I'm the victim. So they're just wired like that. It just goes right there. Now, this is very different from the martyr response. So the martyr response, if you were to say to them, you got late and I was waiting for you, the martyr response would be, I am so sorry. And they'd be so embarrassed. And they'd say, how can I make it up to you? And, I'm really, really sorry about doing this. And they may keep apologizing, tremendously. And they may want to make it up to you. They may feel guilty for days afterwards. I don't know how I could forget to call you. Say that it's a mistake that they made. But likely people with the martyr one are with the martyr sort of mindset, they may actually really, really not do something like that, because it would bother them so much for days afterwards that they potentially hurt somebody who was waiting for them. And, that they lose the respect and liking of that person. They may overcompensate actually in relationships. And I will make a video about that mindset as well. So let's move back to the narcissistic ones. So the second issue with narcissistic personalities is a lack of empathy around vulnerability. So if they see an injured animal, their first instinct is not to go and rescue that animal. In fact, their first instinct is to turn their face away from that. And that is something that, for people who are a little bit higher on the empathy scale, is hard. And so when you witness something like that, you're like, what happened here? Especially if you're very empathic, which a lot of my people, followers who know me on this channel and otherwise in my life, you know, struggle with sometimes, because their empathy scale is so high, they forget to think about themselves sometimes. And so this, the narcissistic person may actually get really overwhelmed if someone around them is ill. So, say they see somebody sick in their family, they are not going to be there for them. They're not going to want to take care of them. They're not going to want to, check with the doctor and, do all that needs to be done for that member of the family. But most importantly, I mean, the task is something we could, we don't know, like different personality types approach tasks differently. But just focus on the emotional response if they hear about somebody in the family being sick. The first response of that person is, poor me. I have a headache too. you know um, I just feel so upset when I see you sick, that I can't function and I can't take care of you, because it's so upsetting to see you like that. And for someone who's kind of dependent on the narcissist in that moment of vulnerability, that person can get really heartbroken and really upset about them, which is why a lot of people higher on the narcissistic scale cause a lot of damage, because of their fundamental difficulty in feeling empathy and expressing empathy. Now, I'm sorry, just sound like words when the emotion isn't there. So, people who are able to feel emotion, like the more empathic on the spectrum, they will the words I'm sorry are going to sound insincere to them. If they've been around somebody with a higher narcissistic personality, it's just going to sound so insincere to them that there's going to be heartbreak and there's going to be a lot of pain for the empathic person, and resentment as well, because this kind of stuff builds up over time. And so narcissistic people kind of get very surprised if you tell them this, that I feel so hurt because over the years, I haven't seen you empathize with me when I was diagnosed with this, or that I had this problem, or I was in so much pain, I was hobbling, and you just didn't even, ask me if I needed anything. And you just sort of disappeared on me and phoned me, after I was completely well and back at work or something like that. So that feeling of emotional neglect, people with a strong need for emotional connection and support may feel very neglected in relationships with more narcissistic people, because the narcissistic person just cannot empathize. Their first reaction is not empathy. That first reaction is fear, um, anxiety. So, that's a big one for coping with people with narcissistic traits. It's a very big issue in relationships, usually. Okay, now the third one, which is actually a really hard one as well. So, say, for example, they've done this, but the narcissistic person is not going to feel remorse afterwards. That, hey, my friend, my spouse, my family member was really sick, and I still left them and went to this somewhat unimportant meeting, perhaps. And so they couldn't get to the hospital in time, they couldn't get the care in time. There is a general lack of remorse. They will say, I did the best I could for you at the time. Now, does it serve you? Is it helpful to you that you are still thinking about that? Isn't it better that you focus on your priorities and take care of yourself? Okay, now a person lower on the scale would say, and who done something like this, gotten so anxious and fear struck that they couldn't take care of their partner, or just were so needy at that themselves at the time and made an excuse, I have a headache or whatever. The moment they realize what they've done, maybe a few weeks later or whenever, maybe a few hours later, they'd be like, I feel like a complete fool for doing this to you. I feel very silly, or I'm really sorry for doing that to you. And is there some way I could fix this? But the narcissist will never voice these kinds of words. The narcissist will abandon and disconnect in that moment. They will not pursue the conversation further. Now, some people with that trait may come back later with okay, little gestures, gifts, a gift out of the blue. And you may think, the person who's in that connection, you may think that they are feeling remorse, but that's your mind making that up. That's not something they've said. So that's another thing that happens in these relationships, and that's very important for to remember, is the illusions and the delusions that happen. He or she sent me a gift. He or she kind of, offered this out of the blue. That means that they actually, okay, so that's where the issue can be, is between people who are normally wired emotionally and the more narcissistic person, is that total disconnect in the emotional worldview, seeing the world in feelings, and feelings in expecting love and empathy, or wanting that, or that being their way. uh, and more narcissistic people, their way is not emotion. So again, something important to remember: the feelings of emotional neglect or emotional inauthenticity. Some people in relationship with narcissistic people feel emotional and inauthenticity. Does this person really care? They're always looking for confirmation. Do you even care? And now the fourth narcissistic trait is a sense of superiority on the basis of uh, random chance things like race, skin color, genetics, location. I live in this part of the town. I am superior to the other part of town. My skin color is this, I'm superior to blah. I know so and so, or I'm related to so I'm a superior person. So these are, or even religion. I follow the best religion in the world. I know the true path. Everybody else doesn't, even if they are professing to be from my religion, they are actually the false ones, and my version is the best one. So that's again something that you will find, a desire for superiority, in narcissistic people, and it's very, very hard for them when they are in environments where they're equal. They're not just the same as everybody else, or they are disenfranchised from that basis of superiority. There can be real grief for them. Okay, now the fifth characteristics of narcissistic people is controlling and perfection. So, narcissistic people have developed a controlling nature. And this controlling nature is a very, very dangerous in some ways, because they'll want to control minuscule details about the other person that they are hooked in. So that's another characteristic of their relationship. They literally have hooks. It feels as if they've dug their nails in and it's right there. They're holding on. And that's the energy of the relationship, that the other person is not in control. The narcissistic person is in control, and they literally kind of people in those relationships with narcissists feel so controlled, feel really, really like they can't step away from the phone. And sometimes that's what happens. They can't step away from the phone without somebody without that narcissistic person getting upset at them. The narcissistic person may want details about everything they did that day. What did you eat? Where did you go? Where were you at this time? How come you didn't tell me that? I found out later that you bought this plate from there and you didn't tell me that day when we had a conversation. So they're going to make sure that the whoever they're in connection with is kind of always activated. And there's a benefit to the narcissistic person in keeping the other person activated. Okay. And yeah, subsequent videos, we're going to go into that cycle of activating the other person, so that the other person is always needing them and in constant state of trauma bonding. Anyway, that's a technical term, and we're going to go deeper into that meaning, at least as the way I practice with it and the way I use it. Now, the next one that is very, very characteristic of narcissistic people is the inability to give credit to other people. So, a person higher on the narcissistic scale may meet you, may look at you up and down. You may feel like the energy is a little off, like this person seems a little disturbed around me. Anyway, never mind. The next day you will see them, they're going to be wearing or having the same thing that you had. They will not give you any credit for it. They will act as if they had it all along. So that's an example of a narcissistic person. Or they will say that they've always known about so and so. If you give them a big book, they'll sort of discredit or fail to acknowledge your help. So that's another thing. Thank you is really hard for them. They fail to acknowledge help, and they fail to give credit. At the workplace, it's tough to work with people with high narcissism, is that they don't want to give any credit to anybody. They look for people they can control. And so we'll go a little bit further in the working with narcissism videos as well. But for now, let's just understand this. Now, the seventh one is gaslighting, changing stories, whichever way term you use it. Gaslighting comes from a movie called Gaslight. And anybody can be a gaslighting person. They can deny facts, and they can deny or pretend that they had nothing to do with something that they actually manufactured. They literally created themselves with effort over a period of time. So you may find a tremendous amount of focus on their own personal goals. That comes naturally to a narcissistic person. Other personalities may struggle with procrastination, but not our friendly narcissists, okay? They have a really clear reason to get up in the morning and they really want to go after that. So what is incredible about the lying is that it can be so blatant. For example, they may say, do this because I say so. When you do it, they'll say, I'm not going to, look at that. I'm not going to do that. Or they just may avoid any memory of promising something to you. So they may even tell you to do something, but like I said, they'll just sort of act as if they had nothing to do with it. You did it, it's your problem. So I've had that happen to me. Like people will say, like somebody I knew would say, um, call me at XYZ time. And then when you call them, they act as if, huh, huh, what's going on? Yeah, huh, yeah. And you're like, you asked me to call you. What's going on? And then they'll just go to totally divert or deflect or talk about something else. The reason why sometimes people lie, narcissistic people lie, is to see how far you'll go, how willing you are to be dominated and controlled by them. And they're setting a stage. You know, you can imagine that this is just an oversight, but many times this is a strategy, a game that they've been playing in that relationship for a very long time. And the game is to keep you on your toes, to make sure you continue to do what they say, and that you this is the way they'll judge the level of control they have over you, because this is how they check whether you're a threat to their power and control or you're not. So you're going to find that gaslighting and lying or changing the facts is pretty common. And you'll wonder why they do it. Do they have a bad memory? Why would somebody gaslight? So this is partly some of the reasons why people high on the narcissism scale lie. One example is President Donald Trump, who lies a lot, and all the news channels are talking about how President Trump, lied about this. Look at him lying, and everybody's getting all worked up about him lying. Nobody is really looking at why he lies. And I'm going to do a whole video on the President Trump personality one of these days. So just post in comments if you're interested in getting, that video. Do subscribe to my channel. This channel is kind of new and I'm still learning YouTube. So your feedback and comments are highly welcome. Okay, now the eighth characteristic of highly narcissistic people is emotional dysregulation. So, what that means is it's a technical term meaning that they are unable to calm themselves down. They can sit with a mindfulness instructor, they can put an app on, they can go for a walk, they can scream and shout, but their anxiety is always high. So, more spiritual people can probably relate to this idea that in spiritual cultures, people say that people who are always anxious like that, that they're not good people, because they're obviously guilty and upset about, the way they've harmed someone. And that energy of hurting and harming other people is probably affecting them. So, I don't know. I think it's a pretty interesting explanation for this. At some level, maybe there is anxiety about being found out for who they really are, because somewhere deep inside, they know that they are doing some pretty nasty and mean things to people. And they know, they are fully aware of the games they play. Um, yeah. So now that So basically, if you're working with a narcissistic person, they will rage. They will want loving affirmation, cuddling, hugs, massages, all sorts of things from their intimate partners, but be very reluctant to give that back to them. that kind of service is something they need to calm down, right? It's the service they need to calm down, and that's why they will always have a source of supply. And so that is can be a bit of a power on them if that's the kind of game somebody wants to play, is to be sort of giving what the narcissist needs. Like, say they like chocolate cake, bake them a chocolate cake. um, Make them some tea, give them a massage, give them a hug or a cuddle, and that's some way to kind of keep them calm. So they'll need someone else to keep them calm, is the point I'm trying to make, because they're not able to calm themselves down. They do not like being alone, because imagine facing themselves. Because when you're alone in solitude, when you face yourself, and you look at yourself, and narcissists do not like that. They will always want to be in a relationship. They hate being alone. Now, the next, the ninth characteristics, sorry, where are we? Ninth characteristics is they do not like responsibility. They always, always blame other people. Say they have a big fight with you because they raged at you, they attacked you for no reason, they really hurt your feelings. And you said, I can't do this anymore. I need a break. And if you go back to them and say, I'm really missing you, and or whatever you say, that let's work on this, they'll turn around and say, you left me. So they're not going to meet you halfway. That's the very important characteristic of narcissistic people. They do not meet you halfway. They actually stand apart, and it's their way that you have to follow. Okay, so for anyone who's truthful, very honest, emotionally authentic, not somebody who can hide their emotions, working with narcissists is very, very hard. It's very challenging. It's very draining. So sooner or later, people around them learn ways to hide their feelings, to basically, hide half the things that are actually going on in order to cope with the narcissist in the middle. So blaming others means that the narcissistic person will blame others for their own mistakes. They'll always see themselves as the victim. Like, for example, when Donald Trump lost the elections, he blamed everybody but himself and his work or his shortcomings. They do not take responsibility for their shortcomings at all. They will always find a scapegoat. So for him, it was the Democrats, or it was the Mexicans, or whoever else that he hates. So there'll be this hater dynamic. They'll be hating on some people in the world. For other people, I've seen it's the hater dynamic is we or some other group, ethnic minority. They'll lash out an ethnic minority. They may even lash out at celebrity figures. They may lash out at important people, because they need a scapegoat to blame. Now, the 10th and final characteristic of narcissism, and this is commonly found, it's everywhere, and people with a high, little bit more narcissism, you're going to see that they have a judgment bias. They judge others first and feel compassion, maybe later, if they're told to feel compassion. So they do judge immediately, and their judgments can be couched as humor. So you may find this in satire, in put downs, in little, like funny jokes. I'm just joking, I just made a joke about something, and that humor can be really crude. It's a judgment. It's a thinly veiled, sometimes a racist or attack on gender, and usually towards more vulnerable people. Um, and then, or it'll be just this, extremely gross humor, about that person. And so these are all kind of narcissistic traits. They're sort of on the darker end of the spectrum. If you put it right in the middle, and the darker end of the spectrum. So I hope that this video helps you identify narcissistic traits and learn a little bit more about narcissism. See if you're um, doing some of these things unconsciously. Sometimes we're unconscious that we're doing them because we see people around us doing these things and we think it's normal, but we don't actually like ourselves much. We don't enjoy them, and we're just doing them because we're around that kind of culture. Sometimes it helps to identify these things so that you can sort of be more aware and self-reflective. And I know that most of us want to live a positive and happy life. So it can be really helpful to kind of examine your own tendencies this way, and to take the leadership to change that. Other times, sometimes we are in abusive situations and we don't quite know what's going on with us because we're getting sick for no reason, or we're getting really uncomfortable for no reason. And we don't know why our relationship doesn't work, or there's this toxic cycle in it. And once you realize this, these videos can also help you, you change your communication patterns so that you are less of a prey for narcissistic attacks. How to kind of close off communication, how to manage your energy so that you're less likely to be attacked. Those are all kind of videos that are coming up in the stream on this channel. Please do subscribe so you get it right away. Thank you so much. Yay!